Hi, Ola. I saw your face for a
Hi.
moment. I was thinking that
Yes,
you and I are the only ones on time, right? Who come early.
I hope not.
I hope not. Yeah.
I hope not. So I will be in touch with you. I just only going.
I couldn't hear you. I think that maybe your internet connection is really bad, or is it mine that is really bad? Yola? Yola, I couldn't hear you earlier. You got disconnected.
Now, yes, now it's better.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
but
yes.
now it's better, right?
Yes.
Yeah. There was problem with my internet, but now it's okay.
Okay.
So
how are you doing? I'm okay. What about you?
I should say okay.
Is it so bad?
Could be better. So you mean that you'd like me to conclude at the end, right? Or somehow
yes, because I will have to leave early. So
okay, but you plan it for 1 hour anyway, right?
Yeah, I assume that it's going to end in 1 hour. Yeah.
Okay, so also moderating questions if they will come, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, that's with the pleasure.
Yeah, we have to go to a meeting, so I won't be able to stay.
Okay. So we're waiting for others now.
Yes, I hope that the students are not tired of that already. You know, it's hard to know how much you should be giving because yeah, I see more people are joining us. Hi, I see that Danielle is here as well.
Hello.
Hi, Danielle. How are you?
I'm very good. Well.
Hello, Danielle, as well. Nice to meet you again.
Hello, Yolanta.
Yeah, that's nice. Very nice. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. We have a difficult day in Israel today.
Why?
It's the Holocaust Day.
Yeah.
Memorial. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's true.
It's a lot of sad stories from yesterday evening until now, and songs, and so it's for many people.
Yeah, we should remember about the history.
Yes. Although it doesn't help.
No, it doesn't seem to help.
No, even in Israel, a lot of racism and problems. Okay, so
maybe we can wait like 2 more minutes. You're the host anyway, so you will be able to share your screen and everything. But let's wait 2 more minutes. I will introduce you and then we can get going.
Great.
Thank you.
And how are you all?
So.
So these are the people who are doing the PhDs, or are they the supervisors, or both?
Mainly students, but actually we opened it up to other people as well. So I actually see 2 names that I'm not familiar with who joined us. And I assume there will be a few more people who are going to join us, mainly from the Euroageism PhD program.
And what are the the professional backgrounds of most people.
Maybe people can introduce themselves now in the next minute or two, since we're waiting anyway. So Laura, do you want to introduce yourself? I see your face. So.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Laura. I'm also one of Liat's students that she supervises with Sejong. And so I think you know Sejong, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I am from the US, and my background is in healthcare administration, but I'm looking at ageism and long-term care. But I'm not in Israel currently. I'm home in the US because of the pandemic.
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately.
You've been in Israel, yeah.
I miss the weather.
Yeah, it's getting hot actually.
So maybe I will not introduce myself because Daniel knows me. So I give the floor for students. So
I see a name that I'm not familiar with, Estela. She's not part of our program, but maybe you would like to introduce yourselves. Your work, or someone else, Willeen, Tai, anyone?
Hi.
Yeah, sure. Hi.
I can introduce. I'm also a PhD student. I'm studying in Linköping University in Sweden. And my thesis is about age discrimination from meso-level perspective in Sweden. Yeah, that's it. And my colleagues in Sweden are Atikar, and he's also here, and Wengsen.
Sorry, I didn't understand.
And I'm in our department are two more PhD students, Atikar and Wengsen. Atikar is here as well.
Does anyone else wish to introduce him herself before we start?
I can introduce. Sure. Hi, Daniel. We might have met before, previously when I worked at Brookdale. I'm currently in the Netherlands, and my research is about how ageism can influence the use and design of digital technology.
Giovanna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Giovanna. I'm currently a PhD student at the Faculty of Pharmacy in the Czech Republic. That's it.
Thank you. I see that Shlomit joined us. Shlomit, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, how are you? Good to see you. I'm here in Israel. I work with Liat. I'm a postdoc in her lab, and we research masculinities within the cinematic world.
Thank you. I see that Atikar is here. Atikar, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Gulin already said something about me. I'm a PhD student in Sweden, Linköping University, in the same division as Gulin is doing. So my research topic is elder care for people living with dementia in Swedish context. Nice to meet you.
Anyone else? I see that there is Yuan Feng.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes. Hi,
hi, I'm a PhD candidate in Erasmus Medical Center in the Netherlands. And I'm working in public health, and but I'm working on the youth healthcare. But I'm interested in this topic, so that's why I'm here. Nice to meet you guys.
Great. So thank you everyone for the introduction. I can now introduce Daniel, and afterwards he's going to get going. So thank you again, Daniel, for agreeing to come and speak with us. Daniel is a professor of welfare economics in the School of Social Work at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He has just retired from his job as the head of research and planning department and the deputy director general at Israel National Insurance Institute. Before that, he worked for 29 years at Israel Central Bank as chief economist and senior advisor to 3 governors. And within that period, he also worked for some 3 years at the International Monetary Fund. Daniel has also been teaching economics and economic policy for many years at the Hebrew University, Ben Gurion University, and Tel Aviv University. His scientific work has been on macro and microeconomic policy, and over the last 20 years, he has been working on poverty, inequality, polarization, and social insurance policy. And I will give you the floor now, Danielle. I would just comment that when he retired, he made some really provocative comments, I think, that were all over the news because he kind of said what he wanted to say, or what I think you've been holding in your stomach for a long time about policy related to poverty and so forth. The floor is yours. Thank you. I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I did try to speak out on the major issues that I've been researching and working on, but it's not always easy because it's a very political setting when you try to work as a professional economist in social affairs, because social affairs are always very loaded. It's not something that you have to take position at some stage, and the major players in the policy field are the finance ministry, and the head of the social insurance is very, very dependent on the government. Although the idea was that it should be non-partisan, strong, independent institution, but it's not in reality. So now that I'm more free to speak, that's a nice thing. And I feel that my influence has been growing since I've been stepping out of the social insurance. On the other hand, of course, you get away from the data and it gets difficult to update all the things, etc. So today we are talking about, I think, a very important subject in the surrounding where there is always more and more inequality. Actually, in Israel, if you analyze, sorry, if you analyze inequality, you will see that the inequality that is produced by the markets in Israel, it's actually declining slowly, but the government has been reducing the progressivity of its policy, and so the net effect has still been an increase in inequality. But I would like to dedicate this lecture to how we should calculate, how we should analyze the standard of living. And I mentioned in the title an adequate standard of living. So I didn't say dignified standard of living, and I didn't say a minimum standard of living, because what I intend to do is to actually bring the two together and say that the adequate standard of living is a mixture between the minimum, which is quite tough, as you will see, and the dignified level of subsistence, which is much better. But of course, it is an expensive thing to support publicly. So the mixture, let's say half and half, or maybe some other mixture, is something that's more politically feasible. And this is not my idea. It's an idea of the head of research of the World Bank, who has retired, who is now in the university, George Washington University. His name is Martin Ravalion, and I use, in half of my model, I use his model quite strongly with some adjustments. We'll talk about that. So first of all, we have to know that the adequate standard of living is a basic human right as it is declared by the United Nations, and we'll have a short look at it. It is very important if you have people who, when you have people, and we always do, who cannot support themselves for many reasons, and so they need this subsistence allowance, and in order for them to live in a reasonable way, you have to give them a sufficient minimum. So it is in that sense something that also you give it to people who are somewhere in between the possibility to care for themselves or to in the need to receive care. So that's why it's also important to see how it affects the how it affects the interests of the people. Do they reduce their work effort or not? And this is something that makes the government sometimes choose a lower than reasonably um, reasonable level of subsistence allowance. It's also a policy tool, and that's very important, especially after we have experienced COVID-19. It's also a tool for debt rescheduling for people, for families that have gone bankrupt, that have taken debts and cannot repay them. And so there is what is called the official receiver, which is a job that exists, I think, in most countries, where the official receiver has the possibility to waive a debt, to tell to allow the person not to repay it or to repay only part of it. So it's a very strong position. The official receiver receives help from many people who manage the debt of such families, and these people have to decide what is the subsistence level, what is the adequate standard of living, in order to see how much they allow the family to deduct from their responsibility to pay the debt, from their income, and only the surplus will be used for repayment. The authorities or the firms which are to be repaid are often very strong institutions like banks, like insurance companies, etc. So it's not an easy task, and there is a strong pressure from strong institutions to receive their debts back. And also, we know, maybe you've seen that in your countries too, that such strong institutions, they like to push people into debts. They like to convince people to take on debt and to buy things, even if they don't need them. And then when these people are not really able to repay, the situation becomes very awkward. So this is a policy tool to help actually both sides, the side of the borrower, because the borrower can find out what is able to borrow and not to exaggerate, and the lender can also use this model in order to see whether the borrower he wants to give a loan, whether he really will be able to repay, because this model gives you the possibility to simulate the situation. So what I did after I built this model in a committee that I was part of, official committee, I built a website at the social insurance, and there people can just get in and put their data, and they can see what is the adequate standard of living according to this model for them. And this takes all the details, and it uses the statistics behind from the survey of expenditure and earnings from the Central Bureau of Statistics. So it's quite a useful tool, but it is relatively social as it has come out, and so it has been facing a lot of opposition from the finance ministry and from the ministry, from several official institutions. Okay, so what does it mean to try to build an adequate standard of living? It's basically a very similar issue to building a poverty line, and that you have all heard about and thought about. A poverty line is a line that you try to create where you can say, okay, if you're above this line, then you're in a reasonable standard of living, maybe, and if you're below it, then it's a problem. Now, where to put this poverty line and how to build it is a big issue. It has been discussed for many, many centuries, even, and certainly decades. What is it about? Is it about what it means to fall into poverty? Is it about lack of sufficient income, or maybe lack of sufficient access to goods and services? The more modern approach, which is led by Amartya Sen, who I was lucky to be a student of. He was also he's still alive. He's in his 90s now, or near his 90s, and he has been rewarded a Nobel Prize for his contribution to social economics and philosophy. He says that what you need is to understand what are the capabilities to function in everyday life and to take care of your family. And if you don't have these capabilities, then you can be considered poor in the functionings that you don't have the capabilities for. So it's a very complicated model that he tries to create. And in that sense, it is not very popular because it's very difficult to calculate it, to analyze it. But nevertheless, today in modern poverty research, this is what people at universities try to figure out. How can you express this in numbers and in hard facts? Is poverty an objective or is it a subjective situation? People can feel poor, although from an objective point of view, if you use a certain poverty measure, you will find that they are not poor. Or on the other hand, they can be objectively poor, but subjectively they will say that they are not poor. This is actually a situation that we find quite often in the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, where they have quite different lifestyle, different consumption patterns, etc., and they feel that they are not poor. And if you just analyze them by the standard statistics, you will say, no, they are poor. But on the other hand, this is due also to the peculiar way of calculating poverty as it is accepted in the OECD, in the European Union, like half median income, etc. So it's an important point. Is poverty an absolute or is it a relative phenomenon? This also is something very important, and we are actually going to see that in our discussion here. I use a hybrid model, meaning that I have some absolute and most of it relative components, such that on the whole it is a hybrid measure. Is it one-dimensional, like do we just look on income, or do we look at consumption, or at both of them, or is it multidimensional because we might look at several other issues? This is what I've talked about just before concerning Sen's approach. Then we can look at the information that we need about in order to decide whether someone lives in poverty, income, goods and services, food access, educational access, access to health services, all very important. what should be the focus of our policy effort? Should we look at the outcomes, simply calculate the poverty rate in the share of poor families in the economy and try to minimize it? Or should we, like the US economists often prefer, simply say, well, as long as we create multiple opportunities for everybody, we are fine. If they don't use the opportunities, it's their fault. So this will make it that we will have people living in poverty, and the policy institutions will not necessarily care about it. So what we believe is that we should look at the outcomes, and if the outcomes are bad, then we have to treat them. Okay, so this is the other issue. Should we aim at minimizing arbitrariness? Well, that sounds quite logical when we define and measure poverty. What I'll try to convince you is that this approach does exactly that. Sen tells us to ask two questions. What is poverty? I mean, how do we identify a poverty situation? And after we have identified it, we have to discuss for everyone, is this person poor? Is that household poor or not? By looking at the question about the meaning of poverty for this specific household. So this is basically the idea of the following approach. The first question, what is poverty? We use, as I said, the expenditure model by the World Bank chief economist. It's not the $1 or $2 poverty line that the World Bank uses. It's a completely different story. It's not the official World Bank poverty measurement, but it is the one that was created by Martin Ravalion. It's relatively easy to calculate. I hope I will convince you of that. And it has a quantifiable meaning of the two ideas of the minimum and the dignity, which when you take half and half or some mixture of it, then this will give you what I call the adequate standard of living. And then once we have decided what it means to be poor, we have to analyze the income of the person, the income sources of the person or of the family, in order to decide whether this person can live above this limit or whether it falls below the limit. And then if the income is lower than this minimum, that means that if we are talking about the model of debt repayment, that person should receive a waiver of the debt. And as I told you, this official receiver in Israel and in other countries, they have the right to decide that a person receives a waiver, does not have to repay the debt. So it's quite an important question to find out. Okay, here we can go really quickly because it's just a replay of the issues I've just been mentioning. So I'll just put it here and you can have a look at it, and we can maybe discuss questions about it later on, but it's exactly what I was just explaining. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is quite strong. It says, of course, all humans are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Everyone, as a member of society, has the right to social security and is entitled to realization through national effort and international cooperation. and in accordance with the organization and resources of each state, of the economic, social, and cultural rights indispensable for the dignity and the free development of the personality. And here's the actual declaration of the standard of living, adequate standard of living. Everyone has the right to standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family, including food, clothing, housing, etc., etc. And as you can see, it's a very nice statement. If we look at it in Israel, we have a court decision that was much worse than that, that declared the adequate standard of living as something that you have to show that you are not very, very poor, not suffer, that you're not in the street. If you're in the street, then you're poor. But if you're not in the street, according to this court decision, then you are not poor. So it's something that can be affected and redefined by countries, and this Universal Declaration is actually a very beautiful, very nice declaration, but it is not quantified, so we need to quantify it. If you want to use it in day-to-day life, you have to say something more clear about it. So now I'm going to two questions that Martin Ravalion, this research director of the World Bank, asked when he built the basic model. The first question I'm telling you in advance is a very radical question, a very hard question. What is the minimal expenditure for survival? What is survival? Survival is something very, very low. The second question is, what is the expenditure representing dignity? Also a very difficult question, because we have now to put some meaning into the word dignity, economic meaning, okay? Monetary characteristics of such a complex issue as dignity. So I'm sure not everybody will like it, but I think it is quite an important step forward, because first of all, the questions are really research questions. They are not just beliefs, yeah? It's two questions that you can analyze, and you can analytically discuss that to the very, in much depth. Now, how does he treat the first question? He says, imagine you're a family and the budget you have is just enough to buy food. Not just food, but he requires the Ministry of Health to do some study about what is the normative food that you would need in order to live and to be active in a healthy way. But he doesn't ask about housing or anything else, just the food, normative food cost. Once you decided how much that is, you take this income and you ask the family, or you try to observe the statistics in order to ask how much will the family reduce its food consumption in order to buy some other stuff, in order to pay for housing or anything else. So it's a very brutal question, because it's only what you have, and in order to satiate yourself, you need to eat that food, you need to buy it. But he asks, how much will you cut into your food certainty in order to buy some other stuff? Once he has found out about this, he will add this expenditure that you have saved from food in order to buy other stuff, and he will add it to the normative food cost and say, this is the lower poverty line. So it's a poverty line that maybe people are actually in the street, because when you're in the street, it's a very hard life, but you got something to eat, and so it's a very, very minimal way of looking at the poverty line. It's a catastrophic way, something that you cannot keep on doing for a long period. So it's good that we have the second question. The second question asks, now let's put all the families in all the households in the economy, from the poorest household to the richest household, on a line, right? The poorest household is on the left, and then we increase, we find the second poor, the third poor, etc., until the richest household. And then we look from the poorest household, we move up to the less poor households in order to find the household that purchases, that actually buys the normative food cost for its family. That depends on the family size, because food you need for everybody. So we have to do this ordering of the families in a way that makes them comparable. There are various sorts of doing this. We call this equivalizing the income, an equivalent scale. I use a little different approach, but let's not get into the technicalities. So we find the poorest family that actually eats to satiety, eats enough to feel good. And then we look, we take this sum and we add to it what this family actually spends on all the other goods and services. And that is the other poverty line, the higher poverty line, the poverty line representing dignity. So let's first look at the food norm. The food norm was in Israel. There was a big research done by the Health Ministry in 2002-2003, together with the Central Bureau of Statistics. They went to the markets and they decided how much, what kind of food diet is healthy, and for the various ages, for the gender, and children, adults, everything. And they put some price together with the Central Bureau of Statistics on the monthly expenditure needed to eat to satiety, to eat enough. So these are the figures in Israeli shekels. It's about 4 and something shekels per euro. So you can figure it out. Let's say, let's take even 1,000 shekels. That would mean 4,000 euro or something like that for a monthly expenditure on food per person. Okay. Then we ask this first question. Now, let's say the family is a family of 4, and they have these 4,000 shekels, or, sorry, 1,000 euro, about 1,000 euro for the family, just for food expenditure. And now, if they need to buy other food, other stuff, they will have to cut into their food consumption. If you calculate what is their food insecurity, you will find that at the minimum level, at this minimum poverty line, the food insecurity is immense. They will save, according to the calculations, they will save something like 70% of their food consumption and spend only 30% on food. They will be really hungry. In the dignity level, the food insecurity is around 0. So they are really secure, because that's how we calculated this measure. We have here for singles and single mothers and for couples and children. But you see, it's not a big difference. They are all around. The uncertainty, the food insecurity is between 60 and 80%, and the same for couples and couples with children. Here, what I do is I calculate returns to scale, because when you have to give a level of money, a sum of money that needs to suffice for a big family, it's not the same as for a single person. If a single person earns 10,000 shekels, it's not the same as if a family of 10 people has the same income, of course. The family of 10 people is much poorer. But is it 10 times poorer? No. What we show here is that when you try to analyze these families at the same level of the question that we've asked, then you will see that the food expenditure is pretty much a multiplication of what one person needs to buy. 10 persons need to buy about 10 times more. But if you're talking about other things, and especially dwelling, then the bigger the family, the lower the per capita cost of the dwelling for the additional persons in the household, because it's enough if you have one kitchen, it's enough if you light the room, then it's going to be light for every person in the family. So there is what we call returns to scale, or there are economies of scale. You do not have to raise your expenditure at the same proportional rate as the number of persons in your family. Okay, so this we take this into account. Now, I'm going to do this very quickly, but it's not a difficult formula. But what you see here is that I take the food norm, which I call ZF, and then I take half and half, for example, or 60% and 40%, or 70 and 30, whatever we decide. That's a political decision for the level of non-food at the lower question, at the tough question, and the non-food at the upper level, at the dignity question. Okay, we have the two questions for the non-food section. So the food is something that is absolute, that we can look at in an absolute way, in the sense that it is the same components of vitamins, of fibers, etc. This does not change very much over the years. Maybe research will change it from time to time, but it's quite given. But the non-food section is much more complicated and needs to be relative. Because if, for example, we don't have computers, then once the computers come up and become a reality, you need them for everything, for living a normal life, for finding a job, for discussing policy as we do now. You need Zoom, you need digital knowledge. So these things change over time. This is why the non-food part has to be relative, looking at the development of the society. It depends if you're in a rich society or in a poor society. The richer the society, the more difficult it becomes for poor people to catch up, because you need a lot of investments, and so this is what we are doing here in this equation. I could show this also graphically, but I think I'm going to skip it so that we'll have time for more questions. I can just very quickly say it. Here on the horizontal axis, you have the consumption expenditure, total consumption expenditure. You have the poorest family on the left, the richest family on the right. So the family that has just enough income to buy the healthy diet is on the vertical axis, the ZF, yeah, we put it as a straight line. So this family, this is a 45-degree line, so we can read it here or here, the same amount, although in the picture it doesn't look like it, but that's what it is. So we have this the family that has just this income to buy the food, just enough to buy the food. But actually they are not going to buy the whole food, with the food with the whole money. They will leave something out in order to add to this food consumption some other things that they need badly. So we take the food consumption, the normative food consumption, which is here, and we add this to this non-food expenditure of the low level to this. So we say the poverty line, the low poverty line is here. You see here that this blue line, which is the actually chosen line by people to buy food. People always will switch from food to non-food when they don't have enough money. Why do they do it from food? Because food is a very divisible commodity. It's something that you can buy a little less, you can buy a little more, you can buy expensive vegetables once every week or once every 2 weeks or once every 3 weeks. So this is why people typically save on food in order to spend for other things. The other things, they can be bulky. Like if you have to pay rent, you have to pay the whole rent. If you pay half the rent, your house owner will not be happy with it, etc. Okay, so I calculate for each type of family, single adult, couple, or single adult plus one, couple plus one, or single plus two, etc. I calculate the various levels of income. This is the lower line, the tough question, and this is the upper line, the more the dignity question, and this is the 50-50 of this of the two extremes. Here you see another line that I calculated for single adult plus one, single adult plus two, to see if there is a difference between the single plus two children or the couple plus one child. It's an important question once you want to be very exact about these things. So we see that it's a very small difference, and we can actually put it aside. What you also see here is that the consumption pattern of the families, here you have the single and the couple with 5 children. You see that what is the major thing that is declining is this spending for rental, for the dwelling, or the imputed rental. It's also in this model, it's very important. If you have your own home, because you received the home from your grandmother or grandfather, so I impute the money that you have received through the fact that you do not have to go and rent an apartment. So this model, and this is the second part of the model about the income source. I said that I didn't say it yet, but this model that I built takes from two sources. One is the World Bank's model of that I described just now, and the other one is the NRC model. NRC is National Research Council of the National Academy of Science of the United States, that is next to the Congress. And they, in the 90s of the previous century, they had a big committee which tried to decide how you need to calculate poverty. So I did not use their expenditure part because I didn't like it very much. I cannot go into the details of it now, but it is arbitrary, whereas the model of Ravalion is very rational. But what I did like is the way they look at the income, because they say, first of all, you have to take income from all sources. If you have income from a home, from your own home, so you have to take this into account, because there are people who do not have an own home, so they have to go out and rent an apartment, and this is very costly. So they are in a disadvantageous situation, and it's important to take that into account. Or maybe a young couple has a house, but it has financed it by a big mortgage from the bank. So the mortgage from the bank is like saying that they are renting the house, they are paying the rent to the bank. So I take this also into account in the model in order to be as accurate as possible about the true level of income. Then we deduct the taxes and all the compulsory deductions, and we deduct the adequate expenditure on childcare and on traveling to work and back, because that is something that you do not own. If you go to work and you have to spend on childcare, this is not something that you can spend in the supermarket or in the little shop across the street, because it's something you need to do if you want to go to work. So we deduct that like taxes. We don't count it as income. Then we deduct also the health insurance. That is in the compulsory deductions. In Israel, at least, in the United States, it's more difficult. But also we deduct essential health expenditures which are not covered by health insurance. People might be sick and have the need for medicine that is not paid by the government, not paid by the health insurance, so they have to pay it privately. So you cannot call this an income that is disposable for living, because they have to spend this income on certain medication. So they are much poorer than someone else who is healthy with the same income. That's why we deduct it, and that's why such a person will be more likely to be waived its debt than another person. This can be quite an important sum. It's quite difficult to calculate it statistically, because as typically sometimes such health problems, they are not very preponderant, so it's difficult to have a statistically good estimate of this number, but at least we put it in and we know it has to be taken into account. After you've deducted all that, you get the residual income that is available for that payment. And sorry, from this, you have now to deduct, this is a mistake, you have to deduct the expenditure from the first model that I told you about, from the minimum dignified or the adequate standard of living. And what is left from this, that is what you can use for debt repayment. So very often this will happen to be zero or negative, which means that you will have to waive the debt to this person. This is why many people disagree with me on this model. But then I say, as a bank, you have to take this into account. You have to decide before you give a debt, before you give a loan, whether this person really can pay back the loan. And if it cannot pay back the loan, don't give him the loan. Now you will say, okay, so you're very tough with the person that needs the money. But no, the money should be given by income support, by the social insurance's income support. So this model is a model that is built on an adequate social insurance, which is not necessarily the case. First of all, I want to show you the importance of the imputed income for poor people. Here you see on the horizontal line, you see the 10 income deciles. Yeah, the first decile, the poor, the very poor, the less poor, the middle class is like the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, maybe eighth decile, and then the richer parts, which are the two upper deciles, maybe even just the 10th decile, which is really the rich section of the economy. And you can see here on the red line, you can see that 39% of the income from all sources in the first decile is imputed income according to this model. So the imputed income of a house, own house, is a very important thing in the statistics, in the reality of these families. You see that poor people, the imputed income is a much higher percentage of the cash income. That is not surprising because the cash income is very small. But also, here you see in the red line that most of this imputed income is due to housing. There are some other small things, but the major thing is housing. Even for the rich persons, 84% of the imputed income is imputed income due to housing. If you have any questions, you are invited to ask. What I show here is the poverty rate, the ratio of poor families according to the low definition and according to the dignity definition. So you see something amazing. What you can see is that there are hardly any families that are so poor that this poverty line fits to them. Only between 3 and 6%. Now, 6% is not so little, because if you look at the Swedish or the Finnish or the Czech poverty, I think it's between 6 and 8%, at least for Sweden. So it's quite high also. But if you look at the high poverty line, what we call the dignified poverty line, then half the population of Israel is below that poverty line. So that would mean that it is a very exaggerated way of measuring poverty, because you were not going to argue that half the population in Israel is poor. Maybe it's lower middle class, but not poor. So what we have here is we have a very rational way of defining poverty, but the rational way gives us two very extreme poverty lines. This is why we say, okay, let's try the middle of it. And that's what we do here. We take 50% of the lower poverty line, 50 of the higher, and then we have something that is more likely to be reflecting poverty. In 2017, we had 23% of the poor at this poverty line. We can calculate some other measures. This is the gray one with the squares, is the half median cash income, which is the typically calculated income in the OECD, in the European Union, also at the UN, they calculate this measure. So this is lower. There are less poor people according to the official poverty calculation than according to this Ravalion and NRC combination, FES NRC combination. Okay, I can show some other lines. This is an interesting line, the last one that I put in with the circles, with the white circles here. You see that it drops below the line of the the tough measure that I discussed before. Now, what is this line? This line you get when you take the half median poverty line of 1997, actually, and you keep it fixed, the basket that you can buy with this money, you keep it fixed. You just raise it by the prices, by the inflation of food and vegetables, etc. And then you see that the actual measure that you get is lower than the low level, which means that it's a problematic way of measuring poverty, because we've seen that this is such a tough line, and the absolute poverty measure, which is, by the way, calculated by the Bank of Israel, is falling even below that. So it's a very, very tough measure, and that's why I do not suggest it. We see that the hybrid version that I've discussed now and the relative version, the official relative version, they converge. There was a big difference in the late 90s, and this difference has been falling. If you compare the official poverty line with the absolute, completely absolute poverty line, you see that they diverge. So this shows that a further reason for choosing this hybrid rate is that it eventually converges with the relative definition. Here I show you the income support, the official income support of the social insurance for people who lack money, who don't have enough money. And you can see it's very, very tough. It is far below even the lower level of income necessary for minimum living standards. So this is the official money that you get if you are on income support, if you are aged below 54 or above 54. So you see that it's completely insufficient, which means that the Israeli social insurance should raise the income support. I tried to push that forward many times. We had a big poverty committee, anti-poverty committee, and unfortunately the finance minister was very much against it because they thought that it will influence people to work less, and so it didn't get through. But you can see that the situation in Israel concerning the minimum living standard is very, very tough, and it's very much needed to have such an improvement. I'm sure you realize that this lower level that we calculate is very tough, but it's much higher than the actual income support that we pay in Israel. So this is what I wanted to talk about. Anybody would like to ask some questions?
Yes, yes, we would like to encourage to ask the question to Daniel.
Maybe people are a bit shocked that it's a bit technical.
But the story behind it is the most important. The message which you'd like to tell us, I think that it's the most important. So,
please, Shlomit.
Yeah, I have a technical question. The average monthly, according to the data which I saw, is from 22 to 23. The average amount of money for existence for groceries is between 600 shekels to 900 shekels, and I think it's a bit low. At least in relation to prices today. So it's
it's the 2017 figures, but I agree with you. it looks too low to me too, but unfortunately the health ministry has not redone the research that it did in 2002 and 3, and this was the conclusion. And then I just added the prices, the increase in prices of goods and services concerning food and vegetables and beverages, etc., and exactly as it is from the Central Bureau of Statistics. But even when I discussed it now, I talked about 1,000 shekels, which is more, which probably could be sufficient. But then when you look at the income support, it is so low, even below that level that you say that is unbelievably low. You say it's too low, the one I calculate, but still it's much higher than what the government is prepared to pay to people who are out of money.
Yeah, it's like amazing. Yeah, it's very, very sad. The data tells a very sad story.
Yeah, I
Because
can tell you that
maybe you're hungry and you're on the street and you want to buy something, or it's the story behind the data is of many people in Israel is very sad.
absolutely, and this is why I think that the middle. I think, if you look at the figures, living in Israel, you know that the finance ministry will have a very hard time agreeing that 16,000 shekels per month for a family of 10, they will say it's too much. Although we know that it's probably not. It's not even dignity level living standard.
Yeah, the concept of dignity is really important in this matter.
What do you think about it? The question of, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's essential not to talk only about survival, but also about human dignity in relation to having the means to.
Yeah, I want to specify that the dignity here comes in the following way. Once that the family as a whole eats to satiety, they eat enough. They have enough to eat, which is nice. Second, according to this model, the policy planner does not have to interfere with the expenditure composition. He cannot say, well, you should not buy cigarettes, you should not buy alcohol, you should not buy this or that, but they have to let the family decide. This is part of the dignity. And I don't say that there are not some families that do not decide very qualitatively, but that you can treat in other ways, by social workers who will simply try to help, to assist them in how to spend more rationally, but not in telling them that if they do not comply, they will not get the money, which is in Israel actually the fact. If you get some credit card for the holy days, then you are not allowed to buy wine. But wine is a very central part of inviting your host, your guests, and treating them nicely. So it's not a question of getting drunk, but it's a question of dignity.
I don't know if I can say something, because I don't know. I don't know if maybe there are any other questions or comments or feedback.
Hi Daniel, thanks for this nice presentation.
Yeah.
I have one question regarding the definition of the poverty you used, and also maybe the measurement of the dignity things. Yeah, because you mentioned in your slides like this public can be a very subjective things and also the objective things. So I'm wondering, is there any like this qualitative research done on this, or is only based on the like the numbers, the data?
Well, there is a professor in Israel, Monikendam, from the Bar Ilan University. He used to be at Bar Ilan. He's now retired, but he made a lot of research about subjective poverty. And I told you that in Israel we have a big community of ultra-Orthodox, and they have very clever ways of helping each other. They have a lot of social institutions that help, that are helping each other, and so they don't conceive of themselves as being poor. Also, their consumption is very different. The men usually have a low labor force participation. It's growing over the last few years, but it's still lower than the rest. And the women are the ones who go to work and support the family. And so they are they are deciding on their consumption patterns quite differently. They have enough to eat. They usually will try to have some kind of housing. They don't have people in the streets. So it's a very special way. And when you talk to them, they will say, we are not poor. We are living on a low budget, but we are not poor. So this issue of subjective and objective is quite important. And on the other hand, there are people who cannot make ends meet and who may be above the poverty line, but they still feel poor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Any other issues? Sion, are you here?
Yes, hello.
Hello, Sion. Nice to hear you. Any questions?
Yeah, I think that Sion is with us, right?
Hello.
Hi, Sion. Long time no see. Any questions?
Is there anyone has a questions or comments or something to add? I would like to, so if there is a few minutes, maybe I will just say something, because in fact, I don't know if you know, Daniel, that in some European countries, there was the project in 2013 and published report 2014 about using the methodology which you also present somehow. But when we somehow try to check what is the level of how maybe in other way to say that we also come from the dignity, or what kind of the roles, social roles at a certain stage of the life households and families have to perform. So of course with
can you send me some material on that?
Different expenditure patterns, right? So was carried in Europe, in the European countries. And for example, in each country, we have to, how to say, build the food basket.
Can you send me some material on that?
So we just
Yeah, I think you have a really bad connection. We cannot hear clearly.
I think she dropped out. I will be happy to get some material on that, because I am not aware of this, and if it's similar to my model, then that is nice, because that means I caught some things that might be important. Yolanta?
I don't think she hears you. Oh, she's
Now
back.
we hear you, yes?
Yeah, I was speaking. I was why that kicked me off, right? So I'm sorry that I was, but my internet connection today is not stable.
But can you hear me when I say that?
I don't know what should be.
Yeah, it's impossible to hear you, Yolanda. You don't sound so good.
Yeah, we cannot understand you very well. Can you send me some material on this project? Did you hear my question?
I think she's stuck again, but we can write to her. So thank you very much, Daniel. I really want to thank you. I have to go, but thank you so much. It's been very, very interesting and illuminating and mind-opening.
Thank you, Shlomit.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Are you here?
She's back.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, I see it here. Pilot project. Great. And Yuan, thank you very much, Yuan, for your comment. And thank you, everybody.
Oh, I have one last question.
So I'm really.
Yeah, Yolanta, you're having big problems with the internet, I see. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. I will send the PowerPoint to Liat, and so you will be able to have a further look at it, and I'll be happy to get comments. Okay? Yolanta?
Yes, because the internet is not good today. So I do understand that I'm really sorry for my connection.
It's okay.
But I will write you and
thank you.
Yeah, but
that's interesting. I remember I saw some calculations of food, minimum food
yeah, so that's what I
requirement.
was saying.
Yes, and I saw that they include in Europe, they do include sport, like
yeah, physical activity.
I liked very much, yeah.
So Daniel, I was involved as a Polish expert in calculating this food basket. So we took different products and we check prices and we calculated for a few types of the families what should be the minimum income for food only. Yes. But of course it was also not political easy to show because it was much higher than it was in fact the income,
in reality.
minimum income support.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the same problem.
Yeah, so I will send you the link. So yes.
That is wonderful. I will be very, very grateful.
But what you are doing, it is much more advanced.
Thank you. But
if you like unity,
sorry, what did you say?
I'm saying that we have the meeting in June. I'm saying that we have to say that you're doing such analysis, because for them maybe it will be also interesting, as still the group is somehow meeting from time to
I
time.
would be very happy to meet such a group.
Okay, so I will write you. Okay, Daniel, I will write by email. And
you have my mail. I'm writing it here. Maybe you don't have it.
Okay.
Just a second. Doesn't translate to Hebrew, to English. It sticks to Hebrew.
Be difficult for me.
Don't know what's happening. Ah, here. Okay.
Okay, so by email. Maybe by email I can.
Yeah, I'll send you. I'm sending you my mail here. Okay? You see? In the chat. I wrote it in the chat.
Okay. So Daniel, I'm sorry for my internet connection.
It's okay. That's life. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.